Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, audience members. It's a pleasure to host the third in a joint series organized by Bloomsbury, Pakistan and Aga Khan University's Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilizations. This is a series designed to shed some light on the impact of COVID-19 crisis in Pakistan. The first of these conversations was on focusing on education. The second of these focused more directly on health. So we looked specifically at the health consequences of COVID-19, but the conversations are not meant to focus necessarily on COVID-19. Today, we're very privileged and very fortunate to have two experts on economics and well-being. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but very briefly, we have Dr. Miftah Ismail, who is a former finance minister of the Pakistan government, and we have Dr. Sohail Anwar Choudhry, who is a secretary to the Government of Punjab. Now, what we want to do here is to understand both the impact, the direct impact on the macroeconomics of the country, but also what this means for issues of inequality, poverty alleviation, and broader well-being. So I'm going to ask each of these gentlemen to give me a kind of summary, a potted summary of each of these topics, and then we will open it up to a more conversational discussion. We will also take questions from the audience. So if in the chat section of the Facebook page, if you go ahead and write in your questions, I will pick out questions and read them at the end. We're going to reserve about 15 to 20 minutes at the end for audience questions. So Dr. Miftah Ismail, if I could, I invite you to give us just a brief summary. How has COVID-19 impacted the macroeconomy of Pakistan, please?
Thank you, Stephen. I want to thank the Aga Khan University's Institute for the study of Muslim civilization, as well as Bloomsbury, Pakistan, for giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you. I've been asked to talk about the macroeconomic impact of COVID on Pakistan's economy. Let me just first of all admit my limited knowledge in this field, not just because of my own acute limitations, but also because there is a lot of uncertainty surrounding this. And people talk about recovery, and they talk about various types of recoveries, various shapes of recoveries, whether it's going to be a U-shaped recovery or a V-shaped recovery or a Nike swash type of recovery. And so really, I mean, the last pandemic of this magnitude we had was in 1918. And I've read a couple of papers out of West Virginia University and Case Western Reserve University. It wasn't called that at that time, on employment, etc. during that time. But really, we don't, as the economic profession, we don't really have so much information about what exactly happened. And obviously, things are very different now. Online economy is very big these days, so the impact is very different. So, I mean, not only do I not know what exactly is going to happen, and there's much uncertainty, but I think there's genuine uncertainty as to what will happen. Having said all of that, with this large, longish caveat, let me just say that I will talk about two different aspects or two different impacts. One is on the economy of Pakistan and one is on government finances. So what happened is that with the impact of COVID in March, the government finances got really disturbed, and our government was not able to collect a lot of revenues in March, April, May, and June. And certainly I think that there is probably a loss of about 400 billion rupees, 1% of GDP, in government revenues, so, and hence the deficit has gone up by that amount. The international agencies of the world have really helped government out, and the government finances, even though we lost a lot of revenues in the last fiscal year from March to June, IMF, for instance, gave a $1.4 billion loan. Normally, an IMF loan is just kept in the state bank, is not utilized by the government, so it's not allowed to utilize by the governments. But this loan was the different nature of the loan, so that the state bank then forwarded the money to the government of Pakistan. The G20 countries have allowed the government of Pakistan a facility whereby this year they were supposed to pay back $2 billion or something, and they will not have to pay that money back. It has been deferred to a later date. So in terms of our foreign currency payments that we had to make this year, this has there has been a relief again because of COVID. G20 giving us a relief of about $2 billion. IMF giving another $1.4 billion. Plus the IMF has also relaxed conditionalities and benchmarks that the government of Pakistan has to meet from time to time, so that now in this budget, the government did not have to impose new taxes or do a lot of other things that otherwise they would have had to do under the IMF program. Similarly, because the demand and the economy went down precipitously, the State Bank of Pakistan has been able to reduce interest rates from a high of 13.25% to now about, in fact, now exactly 7%. So really, in terms of the government's finances, the impact has been mixed. We've had some relief from international agencies, and we've had some difficulty from difficulties in raising revenues locally. So I think that's a mix. In terms of the economic impact, that's just been very, very bad for the country. Our exports have gone down from March onwards. I think the April exports were down by 50%. The imports were also down by 35%, but the economic, the economy has actually gone into a recession, not just a recession, but it's actually contracting. I think even though the government sort of claimed that the economy was perhaps going to grow by 4% this year, but it was certainly going to grow by about 2 to 3% this year. And for the first 8 months, I think it's fair to say that it was growing at 2 to 3%. And in the last 4 months, really it contracted so badly that we will end the year with about 1% contraction. So at this point, our economy is contracting by about 6 to 7% on a yearly average. And that's huge. And I will leave it to Dr. Sohail Anwar to talk about the impact on the poor, but that really has to be a very devastating impact on the poor. The loss of jobs, the loss of income, it must have made the life of the poor very, very difficult. As it is, it's very difficult. And I'm sure that the stunting in children, hunger will go up, unemployment has obviously doubled, and poverty, the ranks of poor will have swelled. But I'm sure that Dr. Sohail Anwar can talk about this much more knowledgeably than I can. I thought the two, so the industrial production has gone down, your large-scale manufacturing has gone down, and even though the lockdown in Pakistan, to be in all honesty, has not been as strict as it has been in some other countries, and a lot of the economy was working even through the first phase of the lockdown, but certainly it's now all the economy is in full stream. But I don't really see the exports coming back, or at least not growing for some time. Supply chain issue where companies are forced to shut down because of critical items in Western countries. I see consumption patterns of people changing. If you are afflicted with COVID, or if you had to have tests, and tests are very expensive for Pakistan, then a large portion of your income is, is diverted there. Obviously, there are other consequences of that, but the economic impact has been quite substantial for the people of Pakistan, for our industry, for our individuals, and we don't really know when exactly the impact will end. I suspect that it is going to be like this for the entire next fiscal year, and that true growth will return only in the year after that. This is assuming that some sort of a vaccine comes in by the end of this year, and even the Pakistanis are able to get their hands on that vaccine, and the government is able to distribute this, and life returns to some sort of normality. But it is very difficult to see the Western countries having the sort of vigorous economic growth that they were having. America had the lowest unemployment rate in decades. Their economy was growing really fast. This is a very large market for us. Western Europe is a very large market for us. China is a very large market for us. So even if there is no lockdown in Pakistan, even if there is not even a threat of, let's say, COVID in Pakistan, if all of our consumers, all of our customers in all these countries have shut down their economies or are cutting down on expenditures, then it is going to be a problem in Pakistan. Luckily, actually, Pakistan, the textile exports in Pakistan, for instance, which is about 50% of exports in Pakistan. Luckily, we sort of do home textiles, which is bed sheets and towels and things like that, and that hasn't really stopped. I feel badly for Bangladesh, for instance, who are in fashion textiles and garments, and there, you know, the devastation has been horrible because all the stores, major stores and brands in America and Europe are closed. And people at this point are really not buying fashion garments and shirts and expensive shirts and jeans. People are, you know, if they have to, they'll buy curtains and drapes and towels and stuff like that. A lot of Pakistani companies are now making hospital gowns and stuff like that. So there would be some adaptation. But the economy has gone down as reflected in the statistics. I mean, that we were growing at, let's say, 2-3%, we've gone down to 1%. What does that mean in numbers? In numbers, it means that we were going to add about $12 billion or to the economy, and instead we will actually shrink our economy by $4 billion. So that $16 billion is the damage to the economy. The government finances are pretty much okay. In fact, this government had signed a very difficult agreement with the IMF, and this has given it respite. The government finances are respite. So the government is okay, but the people of Pakistan, I think, are not doing as well. And the impact mostly, now if and again, Dr. Anwar will talk about this, but the impact has been disproportionately on the poor. It's not an even impact, and you know, even today, to this day, restaurants are closed. So all the waiters working in restaurants, barber shops are closed, salons are closed. So all these people working for those jobs who have very little savings in the first place, that segment of society has been severely affected. Even the State Bank of Pakistan had come up with very good, reasonable schemes to tiding over businesses during this crisis. But those schemes actually just benefited large Pakistani businesses, you know. But small businesses, the small grocery stores, the salons, the hair barber shops, the bakeries, the small restaurants, you know, those businesses were not helped by, because they're not so documented, so they were not helped by the State Bank. And that is the business that employs most of Pakistanis. You know, the businesses with 2 injection molding machines, doing small, you know, making small plastic toys, or making, you know, teddy bears, or you know, things like that. You know, jugs and glasses and stuff like that. You know, small businesses. Those businesses have been devastated, and it will take some time to come back. I think that will take some time to come back. So one, our recovery depends on what happens in our Western markets, and I don't see anything very growth oriented happening in this year. But those businesses that have gone bankrupt and they have permanently reduced the wealth of Pakistanis, that businesses that have to be brought in, brought back to business. And that's also going to take some time. Just the last thing, the policy of this government and the policy of governments worldwide has been and has to be during COVID is to make sure that there is liquidity in the market. In the US, for instance, the Federal Reserve has not only made interest rates, nominal interest rates almost zero and real interest rates negative actually, but that they're actually now buying corporate bonds. So they're just pushing liquidity into the market as if money is for free. And because there is nothing else in our toolbox left, you know. But the second thing, and the more important thing, and certainly much more important for a country like Pakistan, is to make sure that the very poor are tied, you know, can go through this devastation and can survive and come out of the other end of this devastation. And that is also important because the very poor is a very large segment in Pakistan, and their consumption is also very important. So you have to make sure that the poor survive this crisis. And there, I think the government maybe, and I don't want to be, politically biased about this, but I think that I understand that their hands are tied, they have fiscal difficulties, but I think that they could have done a little bit more. I understand that it's much easier to help larger businesses. They also have much larger voices in Islamabad. But in terms of helping small businesses and in terms of helping the very poor, I know that they've given some money on BIS, some advance money on BIS. They've actually also increased the number of recipients in BIS. But there I think more needs to be done, because there already was a very substantial need in a country where 40% of your children are stunted and go to bed hungry. There is so much to do even in normal times, and when you have such devastation, of course, but I thought that I think a little more innovation and a little more out of box thinking was required. But
Okay.
What it is.
Yeah, thank you. I think that actually is a very nice segue into Dr. Sohail Anwar's bit. We'll come back to many of those issues you raise. I think it's real food for thought there. But now, if I could hand over to you, Dr. Sohail Anwar, Secretary to Punjab Government. Also, I know that you work a great deal with development agencies, DFID, and other multilateral international agencies. So if you could give us that overview of all of that big macroeconomic, rather depressing story that Dr. Miftah Ismail has just talked us through, how is that impacting on the poorest in Pakistan?
Thank you very much, Steve. I think very useful coverage of the economic impact by Dr. Miftah Ismail. So I'll phrase my conversation, as you said, from a viewpoint of poverty and vulnerability in Pakistan. See, in the last 2 decades, poverty rate in Pakistan had declined by about 40%, down from about 64% in 2001 to 24% in 2015, which was a hugely positive development. But with COVID and the overall slowdown, now a reverse trend is on the cards for future. With an imminent negative growth, as Dr. Miftah just said, there will be sizable job losses as well. I heard Dr. Hafiz Pasha, who is a very well-regarded economist in Pakistan, estimating day before yesterday that another 7 million people are vulnerable for unemployment over the next year or so. Among other factors, this too will contribute to a poverty rise. In terms of the estimates on poverty, PIDE, which is Pakistan Institute of Development Economics, thinks that it can go from 34% in the low impact scenario up to 58% in the high impact case of COVID. So if we go with even the moderate view, it will take our poverty rate over 40%, which is a huge change, never experienced to this degree in the past. It will have huge implications for well-being, not only from an economic viewpoint, but also social, emotional, psychological, mental well-being, which is also a strand for today's discussion. So alongside poverty, we should probably also embrace for a little more negativity, if you like, in our society: anxiety, stress, anger, possibly antisocial behavior, crime, because all of these share some common space with poverty. And poverty does not only manifest in emotional or psychological terms, it reflects in lack of human development and human capital as well, which again feeds back into poverty. Thus a perpetual cycle which passes on to next generations also. So when we see malnutrition in children, it has a strong coincidence with poverty. We have almost 1/3 of the children in Pakistan who have stunted growth. Some estimates put this number to 40%. Another 17 million children under 5 miss their routine vaccinations. So you see how another generation, which is often a symbol of hope and future promise, is headed to uncertainty. Our public health system is quite fragile and was already too stretched to deliver even before the pandemic. There is one doctor for almost 960 people. one hospital for over 1,600 people, one hospital bed, sorry. The system cannot afford to recruit the additional 200,000 doctors and 1.4 million nurses that it needs for efficient service delivery. A recent UNDP study estimates nearly 42 million children to be out of school. Adult literacy rate hovers around 60%, give or take a few percentage points, and women literacy is no more than 50%. With COVID, there is a serious challenge to see how many children from lower socioeconomic strata who have stopped going to schools now, they actually do return to schools after the pandemic, because there has been a huge issue in the past to encourage these students from low socioeconomic backgrounds to actually come to school in the first place. As for the response of the government, the federal government, I think, took lead, whereas provinces also joined hands in their own ways. Within the first few weeks of COVID, the federal cabinet announced a relief package of 1,200 billion rupees. Within it, there was a component of 144 billion worth of cash transfers under a program called Emergency Cash Assistance Program. So this program announced to provide 12,000 rupees to about 12 million families. The number of families rose up to 16.5 million later on. These families included several old and new groups of federal government beneficiaries. Almost 4.5 million were already registered with this. But a more mentionable step was the horizontal and vertical expansion of beneficiaries. I don't want to use the technical jargon, but we use a proxy means testing system to identify the poor people in Pakistan. So we had a score of 16.17, which we used as a threshold to extend benefits. The government raised it to 26 for COVID, and in some districts up to 33. So the additional cohort of poor people were also given this benefit of 12,000 rupees. I think provinces also chipped in their own share. I was part of Punjab government's response team, an effort that resulted in a package worth over 100 billion rupees called RISE, Responsive Investments in Social Protection and Economic Recovery. So these were primarily to support provincial cash transfers, some labor-intensive schemes for the laid-off workers. These are kind of not employment guarantee schemes as such, but only choosing and prioritizing those schemes which have the element of labor intensiveness for the new annual development program. 15 billion rupees was reserved for provincial Ehsaas program, about 10 billion for credit support to small industries corporation, and another 6.5 billion for skills also. So I think this is in terms of what has been done. What could be done effectively was to reach out to the laid-off daily wage workers and informal workers more promptly, because this is a group that definitely needs assistance. It is possible that a significant number of these people would have already received 12,000 rupees because they generally come from those poor households which were otherwise eligible for the relief package. But we did not have a mechanism to identify these informal workers per se, who belong to the informal sector, not registered anywhere, and now they have either lost jobs or they are at risk of losing jobs. They said it is worth mentioning that the government has allocated 200 billion rupees for cash assistance to these daily wage workers also, but the mechanism to reach out to them and deliver this assistance is still being contemplated, I would say. I'm not aware if it has been implemented yet. I think we have, in terms of future, in terms of way forward in this area, I think we have introduced some basic features of social protection in Pakistan. In the federal government, we have WISP working for about 12 years now. In Punjab, there is Social Protection Authority. Other provinces are also working on developing such institutions. The need in this area is to graduate ourselves more to more sophisticated systems conceptually and institutionally. By that, I mean to graduate from simply giving cash to lifting people out of poverty, bringing in imaginative livelihood programs, going for productive inclusion of our economically excluded groups, target schemes for vulnerable people, people with disabilities, etc., investment in human capital from an early age, along a life cycle approach, and innovative employment solutions through public work schemes for the laid-off workers. I think in terms of Punjab, I know that in its RISE strategy, Punjab government has identified these priorities and have added them to the annual development plan with the support of DFID and through its subnational governance program. I hope that the other governments will also move in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I mean, you brought in the emergency cash payments, this 144 billion rupees, which is a total relief package that falls within that broader ESAS package of 1.2 trillion rupees designed to address some of these issues. If I could return to you, Dr. Ismail, the state of Pakistan frequently talks about the state of Medina. They use Medina as a model. And I think this is confusing outside of Pakistan. I think it's probably confusing inside Pakistan. Can you tell me sort of concretely, what does that mean? And how could that be possibly advantageous, or is it an irrelevance or red herring in relation to addressing the crisis of Pakistan in the COVID circumstances?
I mean, not being an expert on Islamic history, I don't really know exactly what, and people's PTI has never specified what exactly do they mean by the state of Medina. So I think that, you know, they should actually, I think, put a more concrete example now that they're governing there as to what their objectives are. I think largely it means, broadly, it means Islamic establishment of Islamic welfare state. But you know, given the very tight resources that we have, there is a limit to what we can do. I mean, I see what the government is talking about, and I see the limitations that the government of Pakistan has. But I think that even within the limited resources we have, I think that, you know, as Dr. Sohail Anwar also said, that, you know, some out-of-the-box innovative solutions are required. I mean, I think we missed also in Muslim League also, during our 5 years, we increased the BISP budget. We came at only $40 billion rupees per year, and we left at 125 billion rupees, but we also missed a trick there. And whereas it was important to give this life support to people, and you know, the 5,000 rupees per quarter that we were giving was important. And it's very, very important to those who have no money and those who have no food in their pantry. But at the same time, we should have introduced a bigger program to graduate people out of poverty, to teach younger people, you know, that, some trade skills, and that I think that this is where we missed out. I wouldn't have reduced necessarily the money for going towards poverty, direct cash transfers, but I know maybe 20% of another 20% of that amount could have actually also been used to increase vocational training, etc., etc. PTI has also not done anything. I mean, you know, this 1.2 trillion rupees that they talk about is more a nominal amount that includes $250 billion rupees of wheat purchase that they do anyway. That also includes giving rebates to business people who actually have paid taxes and they are entitled to the refund, and then they do it anyway. So some of that really, I mean, it's about half of that is absolutely not just, you know, any package. And even from that half, actually, I mean, I think seriously, the only COVID package that should count is what the money you give to the poor. Okay. The money you give to businesses, that State Bank gives to businesses, that's really not a COVID package, because, those are loans that you give to businesses. Like I said, as it is, by reducing the interest rates and all that, they've actually made life very comfortable for large businesses or even medium-sized businesses, but it's the small businesses that is the problem. When I say that they weren't innovative enough, I would have thought that this is the year where when you have let's say large-scale manufacturing going in negative, which it has, okay? Typically, you need 6% growth in Pakistan to absorb all the people coming into the labor market. You have about 1.5 million people coming into the labor market. So if you have 0% growth, 1.5 million new entrants to the labor market obviously become unemployed anyway. So for the and then you have large scale manufacturing going in negative, industrial manufacturing going into a negative growth or contraction. So that's when they actually should have done small projects within what is called PSDP, Public Sector Development Program, and what provinces call ADP, Annual Development Programs. So when you have, for instance, factories shut down in Karachi and Lahore, and all these workers are moving away from the cities and going back to their villages, you need to give them something to do. And into cleaning canals right now, and to building small schools, roads, things like that. Just small works program, public works program is what you really need. And start, and I don't see any public works program starting right away. I'm happy that Punjab government is doing something, and Punjab government normally, certainly for the last 10-15 years, has been the best provincial government in Pakistan. But they need to do these small sort of things, small works program, localized work programs that give jobs to our people, and that's going to also move the economy. I think that is a piece of the puzzle that's really missing.
Okay, thank you. I should make a note to our audience. We are a non-partisan platform here, so if we comment on a particular government, doesn't mean we're against or for that government, right? We're trying to understand better. So thank you very much, Dr. Miftah. If I could turn to you, I mean, actually, I think, Dr. Sohail, this is what Dr. Miftah has just talked about is, how you push from the kind of investment subsidy into the big business, which is easy to identify, easy to create a mechanism for channeling resource. But a significant portion of the Pakistan's economy is informal. And as you've already flagged, a direct mechanism of getting money to those people is not a trivial endeavor. Can you give me some indication of the extent of the problem here, and what avenues might the Pakistan government adopt to have a direct cash injection or stimulus package for that informal economy?
Right. I think in the wake of this COVID, informal workers throughout the world remain highly vulnerable to the economic shocks of this pandemic. I remember a couple of years ago, ILO estimated that over 2 billion of world's employed population was informal, which is above 60%. In Pakistan, Labor Force Survey puts the number of employed workers at around 62 million, of whom 38 million are non-agriculture workers. And of these non-agriculture workers, if I remember correctly, about 72% are in the informal sector. So, and these informal workers include domestic workers, home-based workers, street vendors, hawkers, workers of SMEs, etc. They are not registered with either the government or any other unions or institutions for any sort of economic protection for times like this. They do not pay any contributions for their social insurance or old age benefits, so they are mostly on their own. Only 2% of our workforce in Pakistan, both formal and informal, have union memberships. Now, with a negative growth on the cards, there is going to be a significant job loss, as I mentioned earlier. Different estimates range it between 5 to 15 million job losses across formal and informal sector. To bring these people back to labor market, all the labor intensive sectors of the economy will have to be supported. not only with tax cuts, liquidity, credit, wage subsidies, but also, as Dr. Miftah mentioned, through starting employment guarantee schemes, through public work programs, to provide at least a certain number of days of work in a year to these unemployed people. And these programs have worked very successfully elsewhere in the world. And I think I know once again that Punjab government is prioritizing labor-intensive schemes in its annual development plan, where maximum number of jobs can be given. I think this is a strategy that should be adopted everywhere. As for providing direct cash transfers, as I mentioned, there isn't currently a system with the government to provide cash transfer. This is because we simply do not know, as I told you, that these workers are not registered. So we do not know who is a worker who has lost work due to pandemic. So what the system does is, and it's not a very sophisticated way of doing it, that it kind of supports everybody on the basis of their household assets. And that it relies on the assumption that hopefully most of the people who had lost jobs would receive this assistance because they come from poor households. So, but the benefit they are getting is because they come from poor household with less assets, not because they have lost jobs. So that is a shortcoming and flaw of the system, which can only be overcome by improving systems, by going for technical solutions, by revisiting how we enroll people, how we deliver assistance, how we reach out to them, by improving our monitoring mechanisms, etc. This is a technical job with innovative solutions. And I think this is what is going to make our basic system of welfare, which is in its infancy, we can develop it into a more sophisticated system by that.
Thank you. I think one of the things that anyone who's been to Pakistan will see immediately is that striking contrast of incredibly wealthy people with incredibly poor people. And so within a city like Lahore, Karachi, you have just, the most opulent neighborhoods I've ever been to, and some of the worst slums I've ever been to. Within a single city, you have those disparities, but regionally, some of those disparities are enormous. So I recently was in Gilgit-Baltistan, went up to Hunza, and you see, some pretty serious poverty, subsistence level poverty, alongside the sort of really quite comfortable wealth, very, very comfortable wealth. How is COVID-19 impacting on these regional disparities? And is there an opportunity here? I'm trying to make this a positive thing. Is there an opportunity to seize the pandemic, the crisis, to actually address some long-standing structural imbalances in the distribution of resources that maybe couldn't have been tackled without something this big? And I think I open that up to either one of you, because I think you both know much more about this subject than I do.
I've lost the screen a little bit, so I'll ask Dr. Sohail to start with this, if I may.
Well, I think it's a very good question. There's always a regional and spatial dimension of poverty. And in the case of Pakistan, we have vast variations across provinces and within provinces as well. Going by the multidimensional poverty head count, we had a survey a few years ago in which urban Punjab had a poverty head count, MPI head count of 6%, whereas in rural Balochistan, it was 84%. So the regional inequalities are a huge issue. Similarly, disparities exist in poverty rates between urban and rural areas all over Pakistan, with rural areas having several times more poverty, although urban poverty has its own peculiar problems which need targeted attention as well. It is important to remember that 18th constitutional amendment in Pakistan delegated the subject of social welfare to provinces. to federating units. So in the 7th NFC award, the factor of population had a weight of only 82%, while of the remaining 18 percentage points, 10% was given, 10.3 was given on the basis of poverty, backwardness, 2.7 on inverse population density, and I think the remaining 5% was on revenue generation. However, even after adjusting the share of the provinces on the basis of poverty, the federal government has primarily still kept the role of social assistance to itself. I think provinces, if they are getting the share of resources through NFC, in which poverty factor is also factored in, then they should be able to develop their welfare systems at the provincial level also. We actually need to take it at the local level also, but at least we need to have institutional structures in place in the provinces. And within these structures will then come the systems to identify poor people, to register them with welfare rolls, to deliver them cash and other provisions through robust payment instruments, and the monitoring and reconciliation of this system. If these capacities are not developed at the local level, empowering communities, bringing in people, I'm afraid the overall efficacy of the system cannot be improved a lot from what it is today.
Of course, the 18th Amendment, we probably could do a whole session on the implications of the 18th Amendment, but we won't go too much into that today. But if I could just let you have a moment to think about how we might seize, the Pakistan government might seize, Pakistan nation might seize this moment to address some fairly long-standing inequalities.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right that never let a crisis go, and try and convert this into an opportunity. And really, I think the solution to Pakistan's problem is not through government handouts or government programs for poverty alleviation. I think we need to have a fundamental rethink about the social contract we have in this country, about the way we govern our country. The amount of subsidies that are provided to the very rich in Pakistan, the very elite, and you talk about this disparity, is mind-boggling compared to the resources that we have. We talk about 120 or 150 billion rupees going to the very poor, which is okay, which is about 1/4% of our GDP, by the way, or maybe 0.5% of our GDP. And then you look at the subsidy that we supposedly give to farmers, but that really, if you look at the economic analysis, it actually ends up with large fertilizer companies. We are giving them gas at, I think, 60 rupees to 120 rupees per MMBTU, whereas the actual cost to the government companies is about more than 500 rupees. And we are selling to other industries at 1,200 rupees. If you look at transfers of money that has happened to independent power producers, although there are some issues there, and the government of Pakistan has written these contracts since 1994. But the amount of money that goes to these power producers is huge. Similarly, if you look at textile industry, how we have subsidized them over the years, sugar industry, how we have subsidized them over the years, automobile industry, how we have protected them over the years. So the government of Pakistan, in order to try and bring some sort of industrial development in Pakistan, has put up these barriers, has been always ready to give subsidies to our exporters, to our local businesses. And the amount of money that we just transfer to the very rich is huge. I mean, many percent of GDP compared to, what we do to the poor. I think that something like COVID, which has devastated, the very poor, we have no health infrastructure, I think should perhaps serve as a wake-up call. There's never a good time for a pandemic, but this has been a particularly bad time because of the low growth that we already have. The IMF is expecting 1% growth next year, which means that you're going to have another 1.5 million people made unemployed. But the IMF is also expecting 6% growth in India. So obviously they have a more robust economy going in. Then, when it rains, it pours. So we already also have a locust attack, and that's going to devastate the farmers. So this is really a time where we need to stop talking about small changes, but we really need to talk about large scale changes. and we need to orient ourselves. Look, we are not rich enough to be an Islamic welfare state or any welfare state. But there are certain things the government of Pakistan should be able to undertake. One, besides the robust population planning, thing, when Pakistan and Bangladesh, for instance, separated in 1971, East Pakistan had a slightly larger population than West Pakistan. Today they are at 140 million. We are at about 220 million. So we need to think about population planning. Then we need to at least promise that all the children in Pakistan should be given a basic education, a substantial basic education, not this rote memorization that we subject to in alien languages, to people, where we are teaching Urdu to people who don't even speak Urdu at home, whether it's in KP or Sindh or elsewhere. And then we, in Karachi and other cities, we try to teach them English. But we teach them substantial, relevant education, and then we at least take care of their health. So if we can make this promise to the Pakistani children, that we will take care of their health and their nutrition and their education, then I think in 30, 40 years, our societal problems will start, getting solved. But what is the state going to do? I mean, we have so many children. The state, we talk about all these politicians, including myself, I'm guilty as much. We talk about the number of kids out of school, but what have we actually done? Where is show me the money. Where is the money actually going? Have we actually made a substantial effort, or we've changed laws? Have we brought in private sector? What about public-private partnerships? We've not done this thing. And so, there is really two Pakistans. There is this Pakistan of wealth, where if we go to F6 in Islamabad and in Gulbarg, or defense in Lahore, or defense and KDA in Karachi. And then they have these, the Aga Khans of this hospitals of this world who provide first-class educations, medical facilities to them. And then there is the sea of poverty. So I think that, maybe hopefully the COVID will at least open our eyes to the fact that this society is fundamentally unjust to the very poor, and that it's not even market-based. It's not like people are able to sink and swim on their own. We're actually substantially holding barriers against the very poor, and we are stopping them from growing. So I hope that if anything, if we need to change a social contract, we do that. And then from there, we can, maybe hopefully go towards a more just society.
Thank you very much. Now, I promised that we would open up space at the end for questions from the audience. We've got some very interesting questions. And I think actually this maybe follows on from what you've just said, because it's talking about the kind of global positioning of Pakistan. So the question is, how do the large number of Pakistani nationals sent back from UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, how will they impact the country? And the economy, and if I could expand that a little bit more, what is the impact of the diaspora globally? How influential, how important, how much potential do they have to either subvert or enrich the economic prospects of the country? I don't know. Yeah, let's go back to you, Dr. Miftah. Yes.
I mean, I'm uncertain about this, to be very honest with you. I need to think about this answer a little bit more. But we think in terms of remittances in the government of Pakistan. Having been a finance minister, I mean, this is what I think. First thing, that if foreign overseas Pakistanis coming back, I'm thinking, oh my God, what would happen to my remittances? Because I expect $2 billion from them every month. But there's more to that. I mean, if some of these people come in and bring their skills, this could be a boon to Pakistan. Certainly, if our Pakistanis, who live in America and Europe, and especially in North America, where Pakistani are, there's so many Pakistanis who are doctors and engineers and software engineers and entrepreneurs and who've done so well there, if they were to come in and start businesses in Pakistan, they could make an impact. But I think that this idea right now that a lot of expatriate Pakistanis will come back is actually not, I think, not really true. I think some will come back, and but I think that most of them, even if they come back for a bit, will go back to their old jobs or old countries and COVID's going to end in a few months, maybe a year, and then those economies also need these Pakistani skills. So I don't really see a large transfer back to Pakistan of expatriate Pakistanis. Certainly not from Europe and North America, and I think also not from the Middle East. This may be temporary, but it would be okay.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Sohail, there's a question here that's saying, the gentleman is saying that, of course, the data that we've given here, some of the numbers are widely available. We know these, but he's asking, what is the major reason for the poverty? And I think we've touched on it a little bit, some of the social inequalities here. But the question is, what is the major reason for the poverty and the poor response to COVID-19 in Pakistan? Is it a structural problem of the country's economy? Is it the rapidly growing foreign debt servicing? Is it defense spending? Is it a lack of fair distribution of wealth among the people? And undoubtedly the answer is a bit of all, a bit of all of the above. But if I could ask you, Dr. Sohail, in your capacity as a consultant and as a secretary to the Punjab government with a specific remit to look at poverty, what do you think are the sort of persistent drivers of the poverty and social inequalities?
Well, I think just as you said, many factors, but it's just a matter of laying emphasis on the most important ones. I mentioned some of the issues of human development in my opening remarks. Malnutrition, for instance, out of school children, immunization problems. You see, the World Bank has started a human capital index in 2018. And in that index, Pakistan is at 134th place out of 157 countries. What this index shows, this is human capital. This is like the capacity or the ability index to lead good lives, productive lives. So a child born in Pakistan today will realize or attain only 39% of their overall potential by the time they reach the age of 18. So this is what this index says. Only 39% of the potential that they should have, children in Pakistan would only have less than 40% of the potential. This is what leads to poverty, basically. And the world average is around 56%. Even the South Asian average is in mid-40s. So we are almost the lowest. So with the lowest ability to take control of our lives, to lead productive livelihoods, obviously poverty is going to be one of the outcomes. And with growing population of now over 210 million, and a lot of them very young population, as you just mentioned, Pakistan needs to invest more resources in children from an early age, programs such as health and nutrition during the first 1,000 days, because that is when you can avert stunting and malnutrition that impacts rest of their lives. So the first 1,000 days are important for growth monitoring, nutrition, then the early school years, girls' education, productive skills and livelihood programs for the youth. I think all of these programs, and I'm sorry about bringing that example again from Punjab government, but very soon a new program is going to be rolled out. It's called Human Capital Investment Project. It's been funded by the World Bank, $330 million project, which is going to pilot all these initiatives, investments in early childhood to take care of poverty at later stage. So there are other aspects of it which are more macroeconomic, and maybe Dr. Miftah would like to throw some light on that. But the human aspect, how human beings can be trained to avert poverty, I think it is in these areas.
Thank you. If I could, we were almost out of time, but there is one question more that I think, Dr. Miftah, I would very much like to hear your thoughts on it. We've spoken about a lot of money passing around, and the question is really about how you manage with these 12,000 rupee transfers. How do we minimize leakages from the system due to corruption at the local, city, and even sort of national level? And I think as, you know, as a former Minister of Finance, you will have probably know more about the accusations of corruption and how one stems it. What are the checks you put in place? How can you put in checks with these volumes of money that must be distributed urgently, very, very quickly? How can we actually get a handle on corruption, or indeed, should we try?
I honestly, I think we should not even try. Who cheats for 12,000 rupees? The very poor, right? So Dr. Sohail said that, you know, once we were cutting off the best recipient to the 16% poorest people. Now we've gone to the 26% poorest people. Maybe, you know, the 35th% poorest people will get another 12,000 rupees that he did not deserve or she did not deserve. Let it be. You know, we have no way of documenting who is really poor and who is not. Even the BIS survey is 10 years old, 12 years old, and it's outdated. There are several issues with this. There are ethnic disparities and all that stuff. That we're not talking about this because we really need to transfer this money to the poor. If somebody is cheating you, and this 12,000 rupees is I think for 4 months, if I'm not wrong. So 4-month thing. So if somebody is cheating you for 3,000 rupees a month, you know, let him or let her do this, you know, and yes, there would be a 4 or 5% leakage. So what? You know, this is a country where 30% of electricity produced is actually lost in transmission. This is a country where 20% of gas which is produced is lost in transmission. This is a country where PIA loses 50 billion rupees a year. Steel mill loses God knows how many billion rupees a year. You know, the subsidies, you give subsidies to fertilizers, to sugar, to all these companies, you know, and we're worried about people getting 12,000 rupees and we're worried about corruption. I think these are misplaced priorities, to be very honest.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, it's been an eye-opener for me. I hope that our audience has learned something. I think it's, you know, it's clear that the crisis is profound, that we are facing a health crisis and an economic crisis that is unprecedented in our lifetimes. And I think it behooves us all to be more knowledgeable about this and to not think of any of these countries in isolation. So everything you've just said, Dr. Miftah, about, you know, not worrying about the petty corruption. In fact, we've had exactly the same debate here in the UK, right? The mass distribution of money, there are people who worry about somebody, you know, pilfering it, and you just think at this point, get the money out, we'll worry about the corruption later, if indeed we want to call it corruption. And I think in the United States, they have very similar debates. And Dr. Sohail, thank you very much. I think your insights into poverty alleviation and what can be done in a kind of a longer term, more systemic, structural way are insightful. And we should probably not just think about them in relation to Pakistan, which has a very high portion of the population that falls in that poverty level, but actually in the United States and in the UK, we have fairly embarrassing rates of homelessness and poverty, and, you know, levels of poverty that I think are comparable to the levels of poverty in Pakistan in terms of the material deprivation that people experience. So I'd like to thank you both very much. It's been my honor to moderate this talk. We will have more in the series of conversation on crisis in Pakistan. Some of the future topics will be looking more specifically at the gender implications of some of what we talked about today. And we will come back to education because I work in an educational institute and this is very near and dear to our hearts. So gentlemen, without further ado, I'd like to thank you very much, give you an applause, and I wish we could have a proper applause for you in the audience. I look forward to meeting you both in London when we're all able to travel again. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Thank you.